Okay, hello again. Now, the latest Auditor-General's report into local government finances again revealing the weakness of financial controls at municipal levels. Now, listen to this number. Only 38 of the 257 municipalities actually received clean audits. Now, we're about to unpack this latest report. Devan Murugan, our business editor, joining me here as we're going to speak to the Auditor-General Tsakani Maluleke. Good afternoon, Devan.
Yes, thanks, Brian. And here's the background. I mean, whether it's water and sanitation, that crisis, the cholera outbreak, or potholed roads, everything is linked in one way or the other to the management of municipalities. Now, many of which the Auditor-General, Tsakani Maluleke, tells us suffer from skills shortages, poor accountability, perhaps poor leadership. And this emerged in that report we saw just a few days ago, 144 pages on the local government audit outcomes released by the AG. Well, Auditor-General is in here, Tsakani Maluleke. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Devan. Good afternoon.
So I'll get to the serious stuff in a moment, but I just want to take us back a little bit here. I see that you applied your skills at the age of 9 in a family-run supermarket. And I suppose even back then behind the cash register, you kind of get a sense as to why those basic fundamentals of reconciling money are important, skills that we can use today.
Absolutely. So I didn't have my skill at the age of 9, but I did learn a few critical things. The importance of a strong tone at the top, the importance of discipline in a system, the idea that at the end of the day you cash up, at the end of the following morning you reconcile your till and you're held accountable if there's a shortage. And that accountability mechanism must apply on time every single day. If you miss it for a week and you don't reconcile your till, you'll never really quite catch up. You won't understand what's happened to the business. You won't understand what's happened at the payout spot.
Yeah, before you get into the serious stuff, good afternoon, Auditor-General. Did the fact that you were brought up by a judge, that Dan George Maluleke, also play a part? You've mentioned discipline, you've mentioned accountability in the upbringing.
Absolutely. And my father was a businessman, but also an attorney, and then he went into the judiciary after some time. Matters of human rights, of social justice, of responsibility, of service, I think those are the values that I imbibed. The matters of work ethic. My father ran a law practice, was very active in his profession, and still was very active in the family business. So we worked all the time.
Yeah, no, you carry those values very well. You are one of the country's shining lights.
And I suppose, you know, you talk about the time behind the till. You had to account to someone. I mean, you were 9 years old and probably a few years after that. And that brings us to where we are today, and that's why you're sitting down here, because much of those fundamental skills, and you spoke about this each time you release a report on the audit outcomes, they lack in our local government and municipal level. I mean, just some stats here. Nearly 3 in 4 of the country's 257 municipalities do not have proper financial controls, right? In some municipalities, I mean, increasingly we are seeing this is the reason, this is the fundamental reason why we are in a state. It wasn't a bleak picture last week. I mean, it was a bleak picture last week.
It was a bleak picture last week. We were at pains to remind the nation that we've got to remember the context. Most of the municipalities were characterized by instability, brought on by the local government elections, which brought on significant change at the political leadership, and that led to instability. But you're quite right. What that report tells us is that we have yet to invest in strong administrations that are strong enough, stable enough, reliable enough to withstand the pressures that come with political events. So that report, when we keep talking about how it's about leadership, we've got to make sure that the political leadership worries about setting up a strong, capable, stable administration, sets the vision, sets the plans, and then holds them accountable for performance. That's what's going to get us to a point where we're building public institutions rather than this cycle where every few years we go backwards.
Yeah, I want to bring Brad down in a moment, but before that, I mean, you speak about political instability and how that affects leaderships, right? Hung councils in some of these municipalities. I mean, it's increasingly becoming a reason as to why not only the financials are a wreck, but the basic operations and service delivery is a wreck. So we see this coalition chaos in many instances, for example. How does that unfold? as you see it?
What happens is every municipality has got significant responsibilities that are attached to the political leadership.
Yep.
Setting the performance framework, putting in place the administration, and driving accountability. If they themselves, as the political leadership, take a long time to stabilize, it translates into weaknesses around planning, around discipline, around monitoring, and ultimately around delivery. The administration is also then lumbered with the same sort of instability, where the process of filling vacancies takes a long time, the process of appointing an accounting officer in the form of the municipal manager, who can then set up his or her team, starting with the CFO and other senior managers. Those processes, the longer they take, the longer it takes for the administration of that institution to stabilize and to do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we talk about accountability, I mean, where it lies really in a municipality, I'm just thinking about professionalization. You've just mentioned leadership, you've mentioned political. So there's politics, there's administration. Administration has to be done by professionals, and we seem to be lacking that big time in our municipalities today.
Yes, absolutely. And you'll see that's been part of our message for a long time. And this year, as part of our call to action, we've said, let's professionalize local government. Let's make that a priority. And as far as we look at the professionalization framework that's been approved by the Cabinet, we see in it enough to really drive professionalization. So now we must get into a point of implementing right across the public service.
Yeah, because it might be one thing having a very good plan and it's not being implemented. Do you think there's political will?
In some instances, yes. We worry that you don't have sustained attention to the basics. And that's what's going to get us to a point where institutions stabilize and institutions perform.
Yeah. Are there some pockets of excellence?
There are indeed. So in our report, we talk about the 38 clean audits, which tells us that the things we prioritize as the audit office as being the key markers of how any public institution should operate, those things are not just desirable, they're possible. And interestingly, there are a number of municipalities that have got clean audits every single year, 9 years, 17 years, which tells us that if you drive this posture that says a clean audit is just the very basic of what we've got to do, let's make sure that remains in place. Let's set up the type of policies, the disciplines, the processes that sustain that, and allow that to give us a proper foundation on which we can then drive delivery and even deal with the inevitable problems that come with the type of uncertainties we all have to contend with.
You've benefited, AG, from getting some enhanced powers over the last few years, and I think that was a very big jump in terms of holding some of these municipalities accountable. I mean, this material irregularity process, and I recall you mentioning this in your parliamentary briefing, that having issued that against, let's call them naughty municipalities, or municipalities that's not just following the process, having issued that material irregularity, which essentially I would imagine holds them personally liable, that made a difference. What do you think you saw there?
So the MI process says when there's a problem where we can see financial loss, where we can see harm to the public, harm to an institution, let's flag it as a material irregularity to the accounting officer.
You couldn't do this previously, could you?
We couldn't do it. So that's different. Whereas we used to audit, give audit findings, give the report, and almost walk away on the expectation that the accounting officer would act on the report. And of course, they were not doing so. So these powers then put on us the authority and the responsibility to follow up on them dealing with the more, let's call it, urgent issues as we've raised as material irregularities. What we're seeing is that accounting officers now understand that there is ongoing follow-up. They also understand that if we don't believe that the actions that they are putting in place are adequate and appropriate, we will step up our action, starting with recommendations and then binding remedial action, which can only be set aside in a court of law, and ultimately issuing a certificate of debt in their name. So this MI process tells us that accounting officers, when they can see that this thing can go to a point where it hits their pocket, they're responding. In 87% of the material irregularities that we issued, there was action only once we raised an issue as an MI. And there should have been action anyway, right? So the point we've been at pains to raise is that the responsiveness we see out of the MI process, we must insist translates into normal audit findings, be they from the AG or from internal auditors. Because accounting officers are the ones that are appointed as the custodians and the stewards of a public institution. And they are the ones who have the responsibility to act when there's a problem and to be responsive. So we must insist that what they're showing as an ability to respond to MIs translates into normal operations.
Have there been consequences, or should there be consequences?
We're seeing more and more consequences apply when we've issued the MI. So accounting officers are now disciplining staff. They are cancelling contracts where money is being lost. They're reporting matters to law enforcement. They're fixing internal controls, which is what you want. And that's how the Municipal Finance Management Act has been designed, on the expectation that the accounting officers will do that. But they haven't been doing it. However, in the context of MIs, we're seeing it.
Yeah. Would you like a bigger stick
I think
as the Auditor General?
I think our stick is fine. Our stick is one that's complementary to other people that must play their role in the accountability ecosystem. Because remember, the AG is only there, let's call it once a year, for a few weeks at a time. And we audit everybody in the whole country. And there are 3,600 of us at the office of the AG, but by no means are we enough to go and run a public institution. The people appointed to run a public institution must do their work. And so when we've issued these MIs, it then becomes important for the people who supervise an accounting officer to follow up, long before the AG does. We've been at pains to say, if we see the AG issue an MI, follow it up with remedial action, refer a matter to law enforcement, because sometimes we do that. When you see us doing it, it must be a signal that the accountability ecosystem is not working. Because if an accounting officer is not doing their work, the council must hold them accountable. If they're not doing it, then it must translate into what the legislature does, into what the MEC for COCTA does, into what the MEC for Provincial Treasury does.
Yep.
If they're not doing their part, then you end up with the AG having to fit in. It should be complementary. It shouldn't be a replacement for the roles of other people.
Yeah, the other issue you've mentioned in your reports, and you've pointed it out, is the role of consultants in our local municipalities, where people are employed to do their jobs, but seemingly they're not doing them. Then they rely on consultants. I mean, how big is this a problem currently?
It's a big problem. We've been flagging it now for at least 10, 11 years. And it started in a particular province, and we could see the number growing in a way we couldn't explain. So we've been tracking it for a long time and raising insights around what drives this number. We're now sitting at 1.6 billion rand a year that's being spent for the sole purpose of compiling financial statements to be presented to the AG. And many of those financials are still not right. The reason this happens is because the basic disciplines are not there. If there isn't somebody who's got the type of skill and the discipline to ensure that the daily controls are there, they are reviewing their reconciliations, they're preparing their monthly reports, those reports are the subject of proper engagement and correction. If those things are not in place and the proper record keeping is not in place, then the municipalities get to the end of the year, get a consultant to help them compile financials purely for audit.
Yep.
And financials are meant to be for something else. They're supposed to be about monthly, quarterly engagements within the institution to see how they're performing. So what it tells us is that those disciplines are not there. And so people then over-rely on consultants, and they use them every single year for very basic things, like compiling VAT returns. And that's a basic thing that should happen as a matter of course.
You can't help the more cynical of the viewers that would think, well, the consultants are used. I mean, you had it 1.3 billion the year before. It's gone up to 1.6 billion. You say they're doing very basic work. And what's shocking is that even when it's reviewed by these consultants, you have a dire state of a financial report that's not working. You can't help a cynic tell you, well, the money's going somewhere else.
Maybe it is. What we've done, though, is we've used our powers, and we've issued material irregularities where we can see there's no value for money.
Yep.
And we place the responsibility at the door of the accounting officer, because they're the ones that are the steward over public funds. They must make sure they hire a consultant only for the things they need, that they drive a skills transfer, that they monitor the work of the consultant. Sometimes we get financials submitted to us directly by a consultant, not by the person appointed to the role.
Yep.
They must scope the work appropriately, and they must make sure they manage the project. And that's the role of the leadership of the institution.
Actually, you mentioned in your briefing as well, that the Hammanskraal cholera deaths is a harsh reminder of what happens when leadership fails. I mean, you've had a team in that related municipality. What did you find there?
You know, we've been auditing the city of Tshwane for many years now, and a couple of years ago we identified that the wastewater treatment plant at Rooiwal was not being maintained properly, and it also needed an upgrade. Yeah. We issued the MI on the basis that we could see that the malfunctioning of that wastewater treatment plant was having a detrimental impact on the environment and on people. We got a commitment on what would be done, starting with the temporary provision of water through tankering services, but also to fix the wastewater treatment plant. Remember, the matter had also been raised by other players, not least of which is the South African Human Rights Commission in their report. So the issues around water quality and access to water at Hammanskraal have been on the table for a long time, raised by different players in the ecosystem of accountability. They should have been acted upon a long time ago. So when I say that it is a harsh reminder of the impact of continuing to neglect the warning signs that come from different players, but also the basic duty of ensuring that infrastructure is maintained, that where there are problems, we respond and we fix things that are going wrong on time and not wait for so long.
Just one more before I bring you in, Brad. The Financial and Fiscal Commission last week, which is a body that suggests or some proposals to the Treasury in terms of its national budget, they say, and this is a recommendation from them, that perhaps some municipalities require a larger share of the budget coming from Treasury because they just don't have the mechanisms to raise their own or generate their own income. I'm just wondering, just given the state of circumstances, is that a good idea or not?
The Financial and Fiscal Commission has this particular mandate, and they're better equipped than I am to articulate on the merits of the financial modelling at the centre of government. What we see is that even those municipalities that are operating under financial distress, for commercial reasons, for matters in the economy, for matters around how they're potentially demarcated, even the little money they do have, they don't manage appropriately. And that's the issue that we keep flagging.
So you can't throw money at the problem. You can give them a bigger budget. They won't be able to manage it properly. You have to organize the financial management set up properly.
Absolutely. You've got to get the skills, you've got to get the governance principles, and you've got to get the type of oversight and accountability and consequence management that'll give you a sense that the financial resources, whatever the quantum, are being managed appropriately.
Yeah. In your report, you mentioned that of the 38 municipalities that got clean audits, 21 are from the Western Cape.
Yes.
I have to bring this to the question. I mean, what does it tell us? I mean, what are you seeing? Why the majority of clean audits are based in the Western Cape?
You know, that's been the trend for many years. And what we see is that many municipalities in the Western Cape have mastered this principle of getting their basics done on time, making sure the internal controls are sound, making sure they've got people who have skills to do the work that's required. But also, the provincial government has made it its business to support those municipalities on an ongoing basis. There's proper monitoring and oversight and support. The trick is to keep sustaining that.
Keep sustaining that. But when you have a metro, you've mentioned Tshwane, Devan was talking about Hammanskraal earlier. I think the clean audits in Gauteng, we've got Ekurhuleni, I think that's what he said, and then Cape Town. When you look at these metros, I mean, these are big. I mean, these are big metros. Johannesburg is the capital of the commercial hub of the country, you know, Gauteng. What do you think is actually going on there? Is it a combination of some of the factors you've already mentioned, or is there something bigger?
Well, from what we've seen, it's a combination of the matters we've raised. When you've got unstable councils, it translates into how the municipality operates. When you've got inadequate attention to ongoing monitoring and oversight, it translates into those things. What we see in Ekurhuleni and City of Cape Town, which is different from the other metros, is that when audit matters are raised, there's responsiveness in the system. It doesn't mean that things are perfect all the time. Those are large organizations, hugely complex, with significant demands on them all the time. But the difference is that when a matter is raised, there is leadership responsiveness.
Yeah, you mentioned there's 3,600 of you across the country. Are you finding cooperation? I think a couple of years ago there were some issues in some of the municipalities when your colleagues arrived to do audits. It was a bit difficult. Some people were making your work difficult. Has that changed?
It's gotten better, but there are still sites where our teams get intimidated, where they get threatened. And I've always said that every single one of us as South Africans should worry when teams of the AGSA are having a hard time doing their work, because these are professionals who choose to serve this nation by doing this work, who are trained as auditors, who sign up to go and audit and report for the benefit of our democracy. So if anybody is threatening them, we should all worry.
Yeah, just to get it clear, there's less intimidation today than there was a few years ago?
Yes.
So things have improved somewhat?
Yes.
Okay.
You spoke about staff turnover, AG, and about the fact that there aren't very often fixed position in the leadership strata of some of these municipalities. Very interesting stats coming out of that last report. A third of the municipalities do not have a permanent municipal manager, and then you have the chief financial officer. I think around a quarter of that don't have a full-time chief financial officer. Who do you hold accountable for that? Because if there isn't someone anchored there, you will have this problem recurring over and over again. Those numbers are quite startling, aren't they?
The leadership of the municipality, starting with the political leadership, the council is responsible for ensuring that they set up a competent and stable administration. And if they don't do that, it translates into ongoing vacancies, into relative chaos in terms of how the municipality functions. If you've got such high turnover at any institution, the people leading the institution don't have the chance to set up controls, to train the teams around them, to make sure they've got a strong team to deal with succession, all of those things. We've tracked this one as well. So over many years now, we've analyzed the link between clean audits on the one hand and the tenure of a municipal manager and a CFO. And then we've compared it to what happens at those that have disclaimers and adverse audit opinions. Much better traction in the cleaner administrations where you've got stability of those key leadership levels. And by the way, we track only MM and CFO because those are the ones we directly interact with given our work. But if you've got that level of instability at those key levels, it normally translates into the other key functions of the municipality. And if you've got that level of stability, it normally translates into the stability on key levels of leadership, such as the more technical aspects around engineering, around infrastructure maintenance and other services. So it's imperative that competence, that stability be the things that we deal with as we professionalize local government.
Radan, before I hand it over to you to wrap up, just one quick one. Geographically speaking, when you take 10 steps back and you look at the country, are there some parts of this country that worry you more than the others, that you think the future definitely does not look as bright as the others?
If you look at our report, Devan, you'll see that Free State and the Northwest are the two that don't have any clean audits and haven't had for a long time. If you look at our reports on the Northern Cape, you'll see that's where we have a few other disclaimers. By the way, it is the Northwest that has the highest number of disclaimers, followed by the Northern Cape. Those three, in our view, are the ones that need direct attention, starting with the first two, the Free State and the Northwest, given the length of time where they've operated with disclaimers, given the significant financial health constraints, and what we pick up when we go and look at the operations around service delivery, around the state of their infrastructure. Those are the ones we worry about.
Okay, hopefully the metros won't give you more headaches, because look what's happening in Johannesburg currently. They say they've got empty coffers. We're concluding now. Thank you very much for your time, AG. The way we started, I want to end off. And I was looking at Twitter timeline, and I found Tsakani Maluleke on Twitter, Tsakani M. Spice. And I thought, when was the last time the AG had time to post anything on Twitter? Because your account is still around.
Yeah, my account is still around, but I don't post on it. I say very little. If I ever go on, is to try and catch up on the news, but I'm hardly on social media. It's just easier for me to focus on the job at hand.
No, and all the best. It's been going on for 11 years as part of the AG's office. We appreciate your time. And as I said earlier, you are one of those shining lights of our country, and keep on doing the good job.
Thank you.
Tsakani Maluleke, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you, Devan.
There you have it, Devan, Murugan and I having chatted there to Tsakani Maluleke, our Auditor-General.